Alright guys, welcome back. This video is going to be about the install of your bed. So your bed should be powder coated. And the first thing you're going to need to do is remove your stock bed. So just a couple things to note on that. I already have it off this pickup. But most pickups are going to have 8 bed bolts that you're going to need to remove. You can remove them from the top. Most of them are going to have factory harnesses beneath that you don't need to hold a wrench on the nut or anything. You can just zip them out from the top. There's probably going to be 8 of those. If you have a gooseneck ball that somehow pinches your bed onto your frame, you need to remove all that. And also some pickups have a small ground strap connected from the bed to the cab up where the junction of the cab and the bed is. So just make sure to remove that if your pickup has one. And also make sure you disconnect your fuel and also your lights. And of course you got to take off your bumper. You got to take off your bumper first. So bumper and bed need to come off. To note, when you take your bed off, it is easiest to just unplug your lights, not cut the wires. That just ensures that they're sorted up here at the end. So instead of cutting them down here, just take loose your tail lights and pop out your backup lights, and also just unplug your tail light wire. So do that for both sides. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut 4 4-inch pieces of 3x3 by 3/16 walled square tubing. These are going to be our mounts that we're going to actually bolt to our frame, and then we're going to set the bed on top of this and weld the bed to these mounts. So you're going to need to cut 4 of these. These are 4 inches long, 3x3 3/16 square tubing. And then also you're going to need to punch a 3/4 inch hole in one side of it in the center. So just got it on one side. Our bolt's going to run through there and then through our stock frame holes. And also you're going to need 4 5/8 bolts, and I like to use nylock nuts. That way they don't vibrate off as you're going down the road. So ideally nylocks. These are grade 8s, just heavy duty's better. So get yourself 4 5/8 bolts, 1.5 inch long, with some nylon, with some nylock nuts. So once you have all that, we're going to go ahead and bolt our 4 mounts onto our frame. So I'm going to start by just bolting these 2 back ones on. So I have this one bolted on already, and I'm going to bolt this one on too. So just run your bolt through your stock frame hole and then bolt this on. So I'm not going to tighten this. I'm going to show you something up on the front real quick, and then we'll move on to tightening all these down. Alright, so we've got the 2 mounts bolted to the back. We're going to have 4 total mounts. These is the 2 up here. So just a quick note about this one. So our mounts need to be at least 4 inches back from the cab, because our tube is 3 inches wide and you want about 1 inch of gap between your bed and the cab. So on some of these models, the mounting hole is only about 3 inches back from the cab. So if that's the case, it's going to be the case on a lot of Fords. You're going to need to add a tab to your mounting block. So here I have just a piece of 1/4 inch thick by 2 flat bar with a 3/4 inch hole drilled in it, and then I just have it welded to the front side of our mounting plate. So we're just going to put the bolt through here and through our mounting hole, and that sets this mounting block back another 2 inches, so we have plenty of room for the front side of our bed to sit down in here. So if your mounting hole is close to your cab, you're going to need to do that. If it's a little farther back, so there's like 4 inches between the edge of your mounting block and the cab, you don't need to add this tab. So I have them added here. You may or may not need to do that. So as you can see here, I got a hole in my tab and a hole in my tube. If you're using a tab, you don't need the hole in the tube. I just had these made beforehand. But if you got the tab, you don't need this. If you didn't have the tab, then obviously your hole would go down, and then it would bolt through the frame and then through this bottom hole. But since I'm using this tab, the bolt's going to go in the tab hole, through the frame hole, and we're just going to bolt it down like that. Another thing to note, most pickup models, the frame is going to be flat from the cab all the way to the edge, but on a few models, the frame is actually going to dip slightly here. Usually when that happens, there is a 1 inch discrepancy between the front side of the frame and the back part of the frame. So this one is level, But if you do have a dip, usually it's an inch. So for example, on this one, if we're using 3-inch tube on the back side, we would need to use 4-inch tube on the front side to make up for that discrepancy that the frame's a little bit lower. But most pickup models, the frame's going to be flat. One way you can tell is you can get a 2x4 or a piece of steel and lay it on your back mount and your front mount, and then the plane of that 2x4 or the steel or whatever you're using should be level with the body line of your pickup. So back here I have a piece of steel laid on the mounting blocks, and I've ensured that that plane is level with the body line of the pickup. So just get something, look down it from the back, and make sure that the plane that your tube or your 2x4 is sitting on is level with the pickup. So after you have all that done, at the end of this video you should have your 4 mounting blocks bolted to your frame and tightened down. Alright guys, so this is just going to be a quick segment about if your pickup has a frame that spreads at the front side. So a lot of pickups are just going to have your frame rails, they're just going to run in 2 straight lines the entire width of the bed. But some models, like these are the new Fords, the 16 through the 20 Fords, they actually spread at the front, and there's a few other models that do this as well. So if you have a model that spreads, obviously your 2 lengthwise inner frame rails on your flatbed are not going to sit directly on top of your frame up here where the frame spreads. The frame is actually going to be outside of your lengthwise inner frame flatbed rails. So what we're going to do for that, if you have one of these models with a spread frame at the front, is we're actually going to have to cut a piece of 3x3 by 3/16 tube that runs the length of the frame mounts like I have here. So what you're going to do is basically just take a measurement from your mounting hole on this side to the mounting hole on the other side, cut yourself a piece of tube that length, and then same rule applies as if you were going to put the small mounting blocks. If your mounting holes are not more than about 4 inches back from the cab, you're going to need to weld tabs on the front. That way there's enough space between the front of this tube and the cab for your front outer frame tube of your bed to sit in there. So if you have the models where the frame spreads at the front, this is what you're going to need to do. And then obviously if you don't, you're going to use the mounting block method like we did on the back. But just wanted to show you this for a few select models. In order to move on, you should have your 4 mounting blocks bolted to your frame. So I got my 2 back here with my 5/8 bolts just bolted to the frame, and then 2 up front as well. And then here I got my tube, and this is just my leveler. You can use a 2x4 lumber, whatever. But if you just get back here on the back and look down this tube, you want it to match the body line. You can look at the door seam on your pickup, just make sure it's at the same plane. Most pickups, the frame is going to be flat, so if you have the same size tube at both ends, it's going to match up perfectly with your body line. But that's what you should have done at this point to move on to the next thing. Okay, so the last thing we need to do before we set the bed on the pickup is add our mud flap bars. So this is what our mud flaps are going to mount to. This is kind of a case-by-case basis depending on what exhaust you have, how big your tires are. But the best way to do this is just to find a spot to weld this to on your frame that isn't going to interfere with your exhaust when you hang it. It needs to be behind the tire, obviously. And then on here we got leaf springs. You need to make sure it's above where the tallest point of the leaf springs are going to be. So this is just right where this overload spring hits. This is right above that. So case-by-case basis, but just do it on the exhaust side first so you know where to place it. So mine barely doesn't hit the exhaust and it's behind the tire, so I'm going to put mine right here. But just find a spot where it doesn't hit your exhaust, it doesn't hit your tire, and it doesn't interfere with any of the suspension, and then weld it on both sides of your frame, obviously. And then after that, you can hit these with some black paint, hit up your welds with some black paint anywhere you ground off the frame to get good contact with your welder. Hit that with black paint, and then while that's drying, you can set the bed on. As far as how long to make this, I just measure from the frame to the outside of your tire. If you have a standard bed, you don't need to worry about this running into your flatbed when you put it on. If you have skirted beds, you might need to make it so that it doesn't hit the outside of your bed, but that's not going to be a problem unless you have really wide tires like this pickup has here. So, like I said, the best way to do that, just measure from the outside of your frame to the outside of your tire and make your piece that length. All right, so the next thing you're going to do after you got your mud flap bars welded on is we're going to actually set the bed on. So your two long frame rails of your flatbed should sit right on your mounts that we bolted to the frame. So get your bed set on, use a shop crane or 6 guys or a tractor or whatever. Get it set on, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to square it up on the frame, and then we're going to weld it on. So the best way to do this is just to measure with your tape measure from the outside of the frame to the edge of your bed, and just make sure those measurements are the same on both sides at the front and the back. So you should have 4 measurements from the frame to the outside of your bed, and they should all be the same. If your bed is built square, that ensures that your bed is square on your frame. Once you have it set on your frame squarely, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to weld it on. So we'll go over that next. The next step is to weld this on. So I'm back here on the passenger side rear corner of the bed. This is our passenger side rear mounting block here. We're just going to weld in the seam on both sides on all 4 of our mounting blocks. And make sure you wear a mask for this, as you're going to be welding through powder coat or paint and it's going to smell nasty, so just wear a mask. But make sure your welder's up nice and hot so you melt through the powder coat or paint, get good penetration, as this is what's going to hold our bed on. So just repeat this for all your mounting blocks. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to weld this, but then you just repeat them on the other 3 and our bed will be welded on. Alright, so just repeat that for this side and the other side, and then on the other 3 mounting blocks. After you get it welded, hit it with some paint so it doesn't rust, but that is how we install this as far as mounting goes. Note, I'm up here on the driver's side, front side of the bed. Before you weld this joint up here, it's a good idea to get some fireproof blanket or even cardboard and just lay it over your fuel tank and all your fuel line and brake line connections, because if a spark gets loose and melts through your brake line or melts into your fuel tank, obviously that's not going to be awesome. So just get something to cover your fuel and before you weld this. Alright guys, so the next step is we're going to just screw our mud flaps on. So the easiest way to do this is that obviously you're going to have your mud flap bars already welded to your frame and painted at this point. The paint should be dry. An easy way to get these on here so you can make sure they're square is just use some vice grips. So I have them clamped at this end and also at this outer end out here that you probably can't see. But it is more important that it looks good from a distance from behind the pickup than it does if it's flush with your mud flap bar. If you got it perfectly square on your frame, you should be able to line up the top edge of your mud flap and it'll be square from the back. But have somebody else or do this yourself, go back about 15 feet from the back of the pickup and look at the mud flap to make sure it's level with the ground. And then you can put a screw in one corner, make sure it's level, and then screw, I usually put 10 screws, just self-tapping screws. It's nice to have a washer too so it doesn't rip out. So just make sure it's level, get it clamped down, and then screw from one end to the other. That'll get all your wrinkles out. And make sure and use washers with your self-tapping screws. So I'm going to go ahead and screw this on, and you guys can just watch this in fast mo. Alright guys, so we're going to hook in the lights now. I'm on the driver's side rear of the bed. Obviously this is my tail light set up here. So this is my stock wiring harness. This just popped, this plug right here popped right out of my tail light on the stock bed, and this is the reverse light from the stock bed on the driver's side. Make sure this is the driver's side harness, as if you hook it up backwards, you'll turn your left turn signal on and your right turn signal will come on, etc. So there's a couple ways to do this, but the easiest and simplest way is we're just going to find out which wire is what. So there's 3 wires. This is the tail light harness. So one of these wires is going to be your ground, one of them is going to be your tail light hot wire, and one of them is going to be your turn signal and brake light hot wire. So the way we figure that out is I'm just going to cut this off. And the next thing you're going to need is a test light. And then, so it's easiest to have two people for this, but just have somebody, or if you're by yourself, you can do this, but make sure your test light's grounded. And then turn on your tail lights and then test all three wires. And your tail light, whichever one lights up your test light when you test it, that is going to be your tail light hot wire. Then turn on your blinker, and whichever one you touch and your test light flashes, that's going to be your blinker and tail light wire. And then the other one is ground. So we're going to do that. We're just going to test them here, but that's how simple it is. Just hook up your test light, turn on your tail lights, test these three wires, whichever one lights up is your tail lights, turn on your blinker, whichever one flashes is your blinker. Put the tail lights and the flashers on, and that's going to power up our tail lights obviously, and then also our turn signals, since turn signals and flashers are the same thing. So when I touch one of these wires, as you can see, it blinks. That means this wire that I'm touching is the left side turn signal and brake light, and then when I touch this wire, it just lights up constantly. That means this is the tail light wire. So what you're going to do is you're going to hook your blinker wire, the one that flashes, you're going to hook that into your red pigtail, and that's going to light up your driver's side tail lights and also your brake lights. And then we're going to hook our just regular running lights into our running light pigtail, which is down here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a red and a black coming off our 2-conductor wire on our bed. So the hot wire, the one that's constantly illuminated, we're going to hook that into our red wire of our running lights. And then that leaves the third wire, which is ground. So the ground wire we're going to hook into our black wire on our 2-conductor connection down here. And that is going to light up all of our running lights. We only need to do that on one side. We don't need to hook the running lights up on the other side because these LEDs are going to pull less juice than your stock lights. So it's not going to blow a fuse if you use one connection to light up all of your running lights. So just to be clear, hook the flashing one when you have your blinkers and your tail lights lit up. Hook the flashing wire up to the red pigtail on your tail lights. Hook the constantly illuminated one, which is your tail lights, into the red wire of your 2-conductor wire down here. And then hook the third one, which shouldn't light up at all when you touch it, when your blinkers and tail lights are on. We're going to hook that into the black wire down here, which is going to be our ground for our running lights. So get that hooked up and then test it before you heat shrink all your connections to make sure everything's right. And then we'll go over to the other side. Okay, one thing to note when you're hooking up your blinker is sometimes, most of the time actually, you're going to hook it up and it's going to flash very fast because these LEDs don't have as much resistance as your stock bulbs. So when I plug it in, see how it's flashing fast on my shirt. So what I have here is a resistor. So you're going to hook one end to ground. This end down here is twisted into my ground wire right here. And then the way to test if this is going to work is just twist the other end of your resistor with the hot wire for your turn signal, and when I hook this back up, it slows the blinker down. So if you have the issue of your blinkers are going really fast, get a couple of these resistors. They come in a 4-pack below the video page if you want to get some. But usually if you plug in a resistor, that's going to solve your problem of fast blinking. If you put one in and it still doesn't slow it down, you can actually put two in, and that will likely solve the problem. So if you put one in, doesn't solve the problem, you put two in, usually that will. But most models are only going to require one of these. So on the resistor, you hook one end to the hot wire of your turn signal and the other end to your ground. And then obviously you do that on both sides. This is the left side here, but as you can see, it slowed it down back to normal speed. So if you have that issue, just wire in a resistor like I have here. The last thing we need to do before we move over to the passenger side is just hook up our reverse lights. So these two wires here, this was connected to my stock reverse light bulb that was hooked into my stock tail light housing. So just cut off those wires, and then when you have them cut off and stripped, just turn your key on, put your pickup in reverse, and get your test light, and whichever one of those lights up, that's your hot reverse wire, and the other one's ground. So then what we do is just our reverse lights down here. You hook your hot one to your red wire and your ground wire to your black wire, and then it should light up these backup lights when you have your pickup in reverse. So just test which one's hot, then connect it, then test it, then crimp and shrink. Once you have all that done, you can zip tie everything up nice and snug like I have here. We want it nice and tight up here on the top side so people can't see it from when they're looking at it from the outside of the bed. So once you get your reverse lights hooked up, get everything zip tied up nice and tight around your wiring hangers, and then we'll move over to the passenger side, which we're pretty much going to do everything the same. But get these reverse lights hooked up, zip tied, then we'll be done with the driver's side. So now we're over here on the passenger side. The driver's side's done. At this point, you should have a left turn signal that works, your left brake light should work, and all of your tail lights and running lights and marker lights should work. So if you have all of that working, you're ready to be at this point. So we're going to do a lot of the same stuff over here on the passenger side. First things first, I just hooked up my backup lights. This was my stock backup light harness here. I just cut it off, tested the wire, put the hot one to the red wire and the other one to the black wire, and then if you turn reverse on, now both your reverse lights should be working. So over here we do not need to hook up the running lights, as we already hooked them up over on that side, and these LED lights aren't going to draw that much power anyway. So whatever wire of these three, this is the passenger side tail light stock harness, I cut off the plug, and there's three wires. So whichever one's the tail light, you can just tape that back, just tape around the tip and then double it back and tape. We're not going to use that. The only two we're going to use is our ground wire and our blinker wire. So same deal as the other side. Turn on your right blinker and test these, and whichever one lights up your test light and flashes is going to be your blinker wire. We're going to hook that to our red pigtail over here, which is our blinkers and brake lights. And then the black wire, you may not need to use it, but if you have a resistor, you can just hook one side of your resistor to the ground here, and then obviously the other side of your resistor you twist up with your blinker wire and put both of those wire into this connection. That's going to cause the blinker to flash at normal speed. So just test these three wires. The taillight wire we don't need, tape that one back. The ground wire you can hook to one side of your resistor, and then the blinker wire you can hook to the other side of a resistor and then put it in this connection that's going to fire up your brake lights and tail lights on your right side. Once you have that done, so you got your reverse lights both sides, and then all your lights should be working once you get all this done. Okay, so just to show you what I'm talking about here as far as connections go. So these are my three wires that came from the tail light passenger side harness. This is my tail light wire. This is taped up. We don't need this on this side. This is my ground wire. I have one side of my resistor grounded to this wire. And then this is my blinker wire here, which I also twisted together with the other end of my resistor and put it into the hot wire. That heated this up, the turn signal and brake light, and also slowed it down to normal speed. So this is what you're going for at the end of this. After you have all that done, you should be done with wiring. Check all of your lights. They should all work at this point. And then after you've ensured that all of them work, the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to zip tie and tape everything up so that it looks nice and it is functional. So make sure you heat shrink all your butt connectors if you're using the heat shrink butt connections. And we're just going to zip tie everything up nice and tight. You can coil it around these two wiring hangers, but use a ton of zip ties, get everything up here nice and tight, and then we'll be done with wiring. Alright, so once we got the lights in, the next thing we're going to do is mount our fuel. So the best way to do this is first take loose your steel fuel neck from your hoses. So you just undo the hose clamp and pull this off, and you're going to have something that looks like this. So the next thing we're going to do is cut these off just at a point where we could slide our extra hose on. So you're going to want to cut it right here at the elbow on the large tube right here, and then right about here on the small tube. Just make sure that you have a straight pipe to slide hose onto, so don't cut it off up here. It's really hard to slide hose onto there, so cut it off. Give yourself a couple inches of straight pipe before you cut it off. So I'm going to cut these off, and then I'll come back and show you what you should have. So you're going to cut it off here, and then you're also going to cut a couple short sections of large pipe. I'm going to cut it off here, and that's going to be our connector pipe. So I'm going to cut into the pieces that we need and show you, just so you know clearly what I'm talking about, and I'll explain what each piece does. Okay, so this is what you're going for as far as cutting your fuel neck apart. So I've got it cut off here. There's a long enough piece here that I can slide hose onto this, and a long enough piece here that I can slide hose onto there. And then you're also going to need two of the short pieces of the two different pipe sizes. What this is going to be for is this is going to be our connector from our old hose to our new hose. So here's the example for the breather tube. I'm going to slide this in here, and then we're going to slide our new hose onto the other side of this, hose clamp them both, and our new hose is going to connect up here to this right here. So our new hose is just going to go on this side and then up here, and we're going to hose clamp it on both ends. Same deal with this one. This is going to go in, and then we're going to put our new hose from here to here. This way you just don't have to buy as much fuel hose, since fuel hose is extremely expensive. It's about 25 bucks a foot. So that's what you're going to need, is you're going to need your fuel neck cut off and then 2 short pieces of pipe that are both of these sizes. So after you get those done, we'll actually install this filler neck and the hoses. Alright, so we're actually going to install our fuel neck next. So just from the back side, install this into your fuel plate where you want it. So just make sure you rotate this fuel neck so that this filler tube is at the most downward angle, which in this case is going to be right here for this pickup, but it could be different for yours. So just rotate it around until it's the correct angle. Make sure your filler tube does not get above the plane of where your deck is going to be, so make sure it's at least 1 3/4 inches below the top of this outer frame. But other than that, just press it in here like so. Get yourself an 1/8 inch drill bit and a drill, and then drill from the inside through the stock mounting holes on the fuel neck through your fuel plate. Once you have it drilled, just install it from the front with some self-tapping screws, the same kind that you used for your mud flaps, or you can just use your stock screws that came with your filler neck. But get one of those installed. Once you have one of those installed, you don't even need to drill through your stock holes. You can if you want, but you can just drill through the front, through your fuel plate, and then also through the bezel of your fuel neck. You need to get at least 2 of these. 3 is optimal. So I'm just going to drill through in 3 other positions. And one thing to note before you get all 3 drilled in, when you only have 1, you can still rotate it. So grab your fuel cap and make sure that you can screw it in from the front and it fits nicely. It looks good from this outside, and then also the tube's at a downward angle, and this is below the deck. So those are your 3 checks you need to have before you put your second screw in, because once you put 2 screws in, you can't rotate it any longer. So once you get all that stuff done, you can go in and put in the second and third screw. Self-tap the second and third holes, and then we will put the hoses on. Alright, so once you got your fuel neck installed from the outside, the next thing we're going to do is just connect these via fuel hose. So I got my short 2 nipple pieces that we cut off of this inserted into our stock hoses with just the ends of them poking out. We're just going to slide some new hose onto the end of this, and then also this end here on our corresponding tube. So take your measurement. Just measure from the edge of your stock hose to up here to this flare in your neck. Cut a piece of hose that's the same size as this. That length, it's probably going to be 1.5 inches inner diameter usually. And then do the same thing with your breather tube, which is going to usually be 3/4 inch inner diameter hose. So get both of those cut, and then we will just slide those on and hose clamp those together. This is the final product. This is what you're looking for. Make sure before you put your hose on, you have 2 hose clamps on each of these hoses, so you can slide those down and clamp both ends. But basically it should just be at a slightly downward angle like this, so it fills nicely. Both of your hoses are connected at both ends, and this completes the fuel installation. All right, good work so far, everybody. A couple housekeeping things before we go on to the last step is you're going to need to put your license plate on and also your 7-way plug. There is a hole here that's designed for the just standard 7-way plug. More than likely you can use the same one came off of your pickup. Just put it in this hole, drill some holes, and screw it in. Same with the license plate. Just line it up centered, drill 4 holes, screw it in, self-tapping screws, whatever. Also, one final thing you need to do as far as housekeeping goes is hook your cab LED lights up on the cab. Those are going to need to either go to a switch, or if you wanted to wire them in your backup lights, hopefully you already did that, but that is one thing that also needs to get finished. I'm not going to go over that since every pickup is different for stock switches and if it has switches from a factory and whatnot. So the last thing we're going to do is deck this bed. So it's recommended that you use tongue and groove 2x6 lumber, Doug fir. Tongue and groove is just a lot straighter because it's milled better, and also it ties your whole deck together so that when it gets wet it doesn't warp as bad because the whole deck ties into itself. So with that being said, we're going to start on the outside and deck it to the middle. So to start, what you're going to need to do is just measure your outside boards. So if you're using 2x6 tongue and groove, then your boards are 5.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do here is just measure in from this inside edge 5.5 inches, make a mark at 5.5, and then measure the length of this to my mark. And I'm making sure that my tape measure is parallel with this outer frame. It's not crooked at all. That's the way we get a nice measurement. And then you're going to cut your first board to that measurement. Again, here it's better to start with it a little long and then shave a little off than start too short. Tongue and groove's pretty expensive, so you don't want to ruin any lumber. So you're basically just going to do that. We're going to do this outside one first, then we're going to go to the other side and do the outside, and then you just measure in 5.5 inches, measure your widths, and just work from the outside in. Once we get to the middle, I'll show you some things about if you're putting in if you have a gooseneck ball and that sort of stuff. But for now, start with your outside boards. Make sure your tongue of your board is in and the groove is out on both sides, so it should be opposite facing. And also, if you're using tongue and groove, one side of the lumber is going to be beveled and the other side is not. So make sure your bevel side is up, make sure your tongue is in, opposite on the other side. So take your time here, really think about it before you go to sawing away. You don't want to ruin these boards, they're pretty expensive. So we'll start with the outside, move in. As soon as we get to the middle about the gooseneck, we'll go over that. As far as the angle goes, obviously we're going to need to angle our boards a little bit until we get to the corner here. So this should be a 9.5 degree angle. So set your saw, if you got a chop saw, at 9.5 degrees. If you're using a skill saw, you're going to have to draw a 9.5 degree line. But we're going to go 9.5 degrees on the cuts until we make it to this corner here, and then obviously they'll just be at 90. So go ahead and get started on that. We'll move towards the middle. Alright, so once you've worked your way in, once you get 6 boards in from each side, if you're not going to put a gooseneck ball, just continue to cut them the length of the bed until you get a little over 1 board's width in the middle. If you are putting a gooseneck ball, basically we're just going to have a square cut out in the center with a flap that we put on for your access cover for your gooseneck ball. So if you are going to add, or if you already have a gooseneck ball installed and you get 6 boards in, you're going to cut the next 2, so 1 from each side. You're going to cut it the length from the front of the second cross member back to here, and then on the front side you're going to cut the length from the front of your bed to the back of this first cross member. And then that way we'll just have a square cut out in the center for your gooseneck ball access cover. So once you get your boards all the way into the middle, and probably going to be about 8 inches, 7.5 inches on a single rear wheel bed. If you're doing the gooseneck, obviously you got a square cut out. Then we're going to have to rip 2 boards for the center. So what you do on these last 2 boards is you just measure the gap, probably going to be about 7.5 inches. Make sure your boards are snug against the sides. Once you get the decking slammed in, is you're actually just going to screw all the deckings in. So the best way to do this is to use thread cutting screws, 2 1/4 inch thread cutting screws, 1/4 inch diameter. These are below the video pane if you want to purchase these. Pre-drill with a 7/64 drill bit, and then these will zip right in. So just pre-drill all your holes and then zip these in. So you're going to want two at the end of each board. So I got 2 down at this end, 2 down at this end, and then 1 at each of the cross members. So your frame cross members run here, and then on this back one it's going to run something like this, and then in, and then back out. So just mount it on top of your cross members, but 2 on each end, and then single ones on the middle ones. Zip all the You stain the deck and then screw your gooseneck cover on if you have one of those. If you don't, then you're done. So congratulations, guys. Hope this thing turned out sweet for you. Like I said, the last step is we're just going to blow this off and stain it, and this thing will be ready to go.